Piper McLean is one of the most dynamic characters in the pages of The Heroes of Olympus, and in my opinion, one of the most important characters to appear within the Percy Jackson universe. Her first name, Piper, represents a bird, such as squabs, pigeons, and doves, and her last name, McLean, is of a Scottish background, which quite literally means servant of St. John. Rick Riordan explained how he came to create her, saying he toured various schools around the United States of America, and he was especially touched by students on Native American reservations, who approached him and asked him to create a character who could give them representation within literature, as there weren't that many Native American characters that they felt they could relate to. She'd become one of my personal favorites over my time of reading Rick Riordan's works, and I feel the most personal connection with her, aside from Percy Jackson. So, here we go. I'm going to tell you all the full life story of my ultimate favorite female character in fiction, Piper McLean. Enjoy! Piper McLean was born in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, to her father, Tristan McLean, and her mother, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, fertility, and sexuality. After Aphrodite fell for the handsome, aspiring Hollywood actor who grew up on the Cherokee Reservation, she performed the Aphrodite rite of passage, which is to fall in love with an individual, break their heart, and leave them helplessly in love with her forever and ever, never wanting to fall in love with anyone else ever again. By most of Aphrodite's children, this is considered the most romantic, beautiful gesture. When Piper was born, her grandfather, Grandpa Tom, named her Piper because he believed that her voice would be beautiful and powerful enough for her to learn all the classic Cherokee songs, including the snake song, which would allow her to appease any snake-like creatures. For a few years, Piper grew up with no pictures of her mother. She just noted how sad and distant her father seemed. Her father would tell her classic Cherokee stories of ghosts, ancient deities, and talking animals. She would eventually become a vegetarian after passing a meat-packing plant, as the smell of raw meat and dying cows disgusted her so much that she couldn't bring herself to eat meat anymore. Eventually, Tristan would go on to become a world-famous Hollywood actor, starring in various movies and television roles, including a remake of James Bond and probably his most famous, The King of Sparta, a movie that both she and her father would laugh at, embarrassed at the sight of her dad being shirtless on a movie poster showing off pecs and abs. Piper even recounts in The Trials of Apollo, the burning maze, the last time she felt anything relatively normal, when she and her father moved to Los Angeles after he booked his very first movie when Piper was in kindergarten, and they sang A Life of Illusion by Joe Walsh in the car ride together, a song that would go on to describe Piper's feelings towards the life that she'd grow to live. While growing up with a famous father gave Piper many privileges, she was very much in his shadow, embarrassed at her dad's fame and how young women would fawn over him and throw themselves at him. She did everything she possibly could to try and avoid drawing attention to herself, but this wasn't easy due to not only her dad's fame, but also that her eyes continuously shifted colors, making her absolutely beautiful even before Aphrodite's blessing. In order to ensure she didn't draw too much attention, she avoided her peers, was turned off by snobby popular girls, and intentionally grabbed a pair of craft scissors to chop her hair very messily. Despite not wanting the public's attention and the glamour of personal chefs, Piper still yearned personal attention from her father. It got to a point where she began stealing things, simply asking to borrow something from someone, and these people would simply just give these things to her. These were the earliest signs of Piper's ability to charm speak, a special power that very few children of Aphrodite possess. Piper's father would send her to many fancy private schools, and his assistant Jane would accompany Piper to parents' night, when all Piper wanted was for her father to do this. Eventually, Piper grew more daring and went as far as to steal a BMW. When out surfing with her dad on a private beach in Malibu one day, she and her dad played a game of Any Three Questions, where the rule was she only got to ask him 3 questions and he had to answer. But their outing together was unfortunately cut short when Jane approached them telling Tristan about Piper stealing a car. Her father told her that he could buy her any car she could ever want and that she was close to getting her learner's permit. But Piper yelled at him, saying she wanted to go to public school and have her father take her to back-to-school nights instead of his assistant. Her father worked out a deal with his attorneys, agreeing to send Piper to a special school called the Wilderness School, a private school for kids with criminal records in Nevada. Upon her arrival, she met a fellow classmate named Leo Valdez, and he instantaneously became her best friend, where they told each other things they never said to others. Piper telling Leo about the BMW she borrowed, and her father being a world-famous actor, and Leo revealing that he ran away from 6 different foster homes. The two became deeply close, sharing a special friendship, with Piper always sticking up for him when snobby popular girls would pick on her friend. They bonded through Leo's fun-loving pranks, most of which he pulled on their gym teacher, Gleason Hedge, who was assigned to be their protector. Eventually, her and Leo's lives were changed by Hera, who hatched a plan to stop Gaia and the Giants in the Second Giant War. Hera's idea was to misplace Percy Jackson, the leader for Camp Half-Blood, and Jason Grace, the praetor of Camp Jupiter, by giving the 2 boys amnesia. Hera placed Jason on the same school bus as Piper and Leo, giving Piper and Leo fake misted memories of Piper being Jason's girlfriend, and Leo being Jason's best friend since the beginning of the school year. Piper even had a fake memory planted in her mind of her and Jason's first kiss as they shared a special dance under the stars on the Wilderness School rooftops. On the school field trip to the Grand Canyon, Piper grew increasingly concerned for Jason, who kept on insisting that he wasn't supposed to be there. Unfortunately, Piper got paired up with a classmate named Dylan for the field trip, who continuously tried hitting on her and even joined in on a bunch of popular girls laughing at and humiliating Piper, who yelled racial slurs at her and mocked her for her Native American heritage. But Piper replied back sassily, "My dad's Cherokee, not Hualapai. Course, you'd need a few brain cells to know the difference, Isabel." But the girl replied back, saying Piper never knew her mom. Piper was close to charging at these girls, but Leo told Jason not to fight her battles for her, showing how Piper preferred sticking up for herself. Unfortunately, the trip went sideways when Dylan, Piper's partner, revealed himself to be a Ventus, a wind spirit. Jason and the Ventus battled it out, but Piper got blown over the side of the walkway. Jason fortunately jumped over the edge and dived after her, catching her as they floated a few feet above the ground. This was Jason's first instance where he was able to fly. But the Ventus ended up kidnapping Coach Hedge after he revealed himself to be a satyr and a protector in retirement. Shortly afterward, Annabeth Chase arrived in a chariot pulled by Pegasi, manned by a son of Iris named Butch. Upon her arrival, Annabeth raged and ranted, screaming angrily at the sky as to why she couldn't find her missing boyfriend, Percy Jackson. She explained to Piper and Leo what they were, and insisted that Jason come back with them to Camp Half-Blood. She called Piper a half-blood, something that greatly offended Piper as she thought it was another racial slur. But upon her arrival to Camp Half-Blood, she, Annabeth, Butch, Leo, and Jason crashed into the canoe lake. She even met a particularly unpleasant Aphrodite girl, Drew Tanaka, who mocked her, voicing that Piper didn't belong there, only for Annabeth to shut her down. Annabeth gave Piper a tour of the camp, showing her around and leading her to the weapons shed, where Piper picked out her weapon, Catoptris, which means looking glass, as it gave the user a vision of the future. She learned it was the original weapon of Helen of Troy. But when asking Annabeth if she could use her cell phone, Piper placed a call to her father, worried about him, as she'd been having nightmares, signifying that he was in trouble. Only the person who answered was her dad's assistant, telling her that her father was too busy for her. As Annabeth led her through the campgrounds, Piper was hit with the realization that her memories of Jason were completely fake and planted in her mind by the person who'd kidnapped Percy Jackson. Piper was devastated by this, completely hurt that her and Jason's romance, the very thing that made her so happy, was a huge lie, and this caused her to cry and Annabeth to comfort her. Upon meeting the Oracle, Rachel Elizabeth Dare, Piper was grabbed by Rachel, who was unknowingly possessed by Hera, and it caused Piper to faint. In the infirmary, Piper remained asleep, dreaming back to when she and her father had their outing on the Malibu beaches, her and Jason's first kiss, and of a mysterious figure taunting her, telling her that he had her father, and that if she didn't go to meet with him alone, Tristan would die. When waking in the infirmary, Rachel comforted her and assured her that she should get claimed soon, and that the campfire was starting, even telling her that Annabeth was secretly hoping Piper might be a daughter of Athena. At the campfire, Jason was given his quest and was told to select 2 campers. Drew and Piper both vied to go with Jason, but Jason ultimately selected Piper, and shortly after, Piper was claimed and given the Aphrodite blessing. After being blessed by Aphrodite, her hair was no longer choppy, but sleek, shiny, and perfect, braided with gold. Her hiking boots and snowboarding jacket were replaced by a Grecian dress, and she wore gold armbands. Makeup appeared on her face, and her one pimple that had remained on her nose, which she'd named Bob, disappeared. Drew was horrified by this, ashamed of Piper being her sister, and Piper in turn was just as embarrassed and ashamed, hating her new gorgeous appearance and all the attention it put on her, especially when Jason said, "Wow, Piper, you're a knockout." Only Jason and Leo didn't treat her differently, with Jason even giving her his jacket to wrap around her shoulders, showing her an act of kindness and not bothering to stare at her, something Piper greatly appreciated. The night before the quest, Piper slept terribly, sobbing her eyes out and hoping she could make herself look unattractive again, but Drew told her not to worry, calling her honey in a very condescending tone, assuring her the Aphrodite blessing passes within a few days. Piper watched as Drew mistreated their siblings, pushing them around and humiliating a young girl by throwing her out of the bathroom with soap suds still in her hair, making the little girl cry. Lacey and Mitchell were the only 2 who showed Piper any act of graciousness, helping her pack for the quest and explaining Drew inherited her place as the head counselor after Selena Beauregard, who sacrificed her life during the Battle of Manhattan, tragically died of not just Draken wounds, but also a broken heart, as she'd lost her boyfriend, Charles Beckendorf, the former head counselor of the Hephaestus cabin. They explained how Drew ruled the cabin like a dictator, giving harsh punishments to anyone who acted out of order, even forcing them to wear the shoes of shame, a pair of hideous nurse's shoes that didn't flatter any outfit. Drew went on to spite Selena, calling her dead sister a traitor and thinking of her in complete disgust. Drew eventually rounded on Piper, asking her who her father was, assuming him to be a very unworthy man and a complete loser, but Piper stammered out that her father was Tristan McLean, the movie star, a card Piper hated playing. Piper was once more given a lot of attention, as her brothers and sisters were in awe of her dad being famous, but Drew didn't buy it, saying Piper was charm-speaking them, and the only reason why she was immune to it was due to her ability to charm-speak. But Piper went on to say that her siblings were strong enough to think for themselves, before she went off on the quest with Leo and Jason. While traveling with Jason and Leo, they went to Quebec, where they met Boreas, the king of the northern winds, and his daughter, Kion, the goddess of snow and winter time. It was there that Piper learned she understood fluent French, as it is the language of love. Unfortunately, they get off on a bad foot with Boreas, and while traveling, their mechanical dragon companion, Festus, crash-landed in a parking garage, where Piper and Jason were both kidnapped by Cyclops. Piper tried charm-speaking their way out of it, but Leo luckily ended up saving them using his pyrokinesis. After escaping, they stopped to rest in Chicago, where they went underneath the sewer system only to meet Medea, the infamous sorceress who murdered her own children and was the wife of the original Jason. Only Piper was immune to Medea's charm speak, as she herself was a charm speaker. Medea nearly caused Jason and Leo to turn against one another, but Piper's overwhelming love for Jason and Leo stopped them from killing one another. It was here that Piper learned from Medea that she'd been charm speaking her dad's assistant, Jane, into going along with everything that occurred. After this, they encountered Metis and his son Laertius, who turned her and Leo into solid gold. Unfortunately, Piper ended up suffering hyperthermia, which weakened her in their encounter against Lycoen, the very first werewolf. It was there that Piper told her friends about the anti-Athena, Enceladus, who kidnapped her father in order to get their quest to fail. They ended up meeting Jason's older sister, Thalia Grace, who was in the area with her hunters of Artemis. There, Piper took a keen interest in the hunters, awestruck by their fierce independence and how cool Thalia was. Thalia led them to Aeolus' palace, who in the end tried murdering them on Gaia's behalf. But when she fell asleep that night, Piper was confronted by her mom, Aphrodite, in a dream. This led to one of the most important conversations of the series, in my opinion. It's one of the most important because Piper began realizing who her mom truly was. Piper's mother told her, "Beauty is about finding the right fit, the most natural fit. To be perfect, you have to feel perfect about yourself. Avoid trying to be something you're not." Aphrodite recognized this in her daughter, prizing Piper as one of her most favorite daughters, and gave Piper information regarding who they were about to face, Gaia, Mother Earth. She even told Piper that Tristan was one of her most favorite lovers, and that it pained her deeply to leave him so hurt. As the dream came to a close, Aphrodite presented her daughter one of Medea's potions, saying it could erase any memory, and that Piper might need it. When they awoke in San Francisco, Piper was shocked to see her mom had dressed her in black leggings, a blue dress, her most favorite snowboarding jacket, and a pair of heels, surprised at how well they all went together. She proceeded to tell her friends that Gaia was her adversary, and they made their way to Mount Diablo to rescue Piper's dad. After saving Tristan, Piper's dress was said to be torn and her hair had come undone, but Jason still thought her to be the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. After getting them a helicopter, Piper and her father had a conversation, with Tristan expressing pride in his daughter. Unfortunately, this moment couldn't last, as Piper decided to give Tristan the potion that would erase his memory of all that had happened, as she recognized the events would be far too traumatizing for her father to deal with. Piper, Jason, and Leo made their way to the Wolf House, where they battled Porphyrion, the anti-Zeus, and they met Hera, who was caged by Gaia. Piper charm spoke Gaia back to sleep, while Leo cut the bars of the cage, and Piper's charm speak eventually saved Jason, who was thought to have died after seeing Hera's divine form. They were teleported back to camp, and from there, Piper stood up to Drew once and for all, telling her Selena Beauregard was a hero, and that Aphrodite's philosophy was truly about self-love, compassion, spreading kindness, and being loving. She declared herself head counselor, and Drew resigned to her second in command. Piper's siblings proceeded to lift her up onto their shoulders, carrying her to the dining pavilion, still clad in pajamas, and Piper was happier than she'd ever been in a long time. She eventually got to talk to her father through a video call, where her dad said once more that he was proud of her, and that his new assistant was Gleason Hedges' girlfriend, a cloud nymph named Melly. Piper eventually got together with Jason officially, and she she and Jason both agreed that they would join Leo and Annabeth on the quest for the Prophecy of the Seven, so they could find Percy at Camp Jupiter. Percy's only knowledge of Piper and Leo was through his dreams, and him hearing one of the Cyclopes talking about them. Piper eventually met Percy officially, overjoyed to see Annabeth, who'd become her best friend, so happy. Jason even offered to show her around New Rome, which annoyed his former co-praetor, Reina Ramirez Arellano, who'd shown interest in Jason. But when Leo unintentionally fired at New Rome on their ship, the Argos II, the 7 questers had to flee. Piper cared for Jason while he was unconscious, and was tasked with going off to look for supplies for the Argos II due to it needing to be repaired. Eventually, Piper went with Jason and Percy to meet with Bacchus, the Roman counterpart of Mr. D, the god of wine. But the meeting was cut short when Percy and Jason were possessed by eidolons, and Piper was tasked to choose which one to sacrifice to Gaia. But Piper saved them both, charm-speaking the boys to stop fighting one another, and convincing Percy's pet Pegasus, Blackjack, to knock Percy out. She then charm-spoke the eidolons into leaving the bodies of Percy, Jason, and Leo, and she rushed to Jason's side immediately. Throughout the quest, Piper, Annabeth, and Hazel eventually encountered Aphrodite in Charleston, much to Piper's embarrassment when her mom picked apart Annabeth and Hazel's clothes, as Piper thought they both looked beautiful enough. She was especially disgusted when her mom revealed that she told Reina a year ago that Reina wouldn't find love and that no man would ever heal her heart or her problems. The 7 eventually made their way to the Mediterranean, and Piper and Jason ended up confronting Hercules, and they were given the task to retrieve one of Aeschylus's horns. It was here that they learned Hercules to be a huge jerk, especially when Aeschylus revealed that Hercules stole a woman that he loved. In the original story, though, Aeschylus actually raped this girl, but Reardon does his own twist on things anyway to make things a little less dark when kids read it. Aeschylus eventually even tried stealing Piper from Jason, telling her that she deserved better than a son of Jupiter. But Piper's overwhelming love for Jason led to her stopping Aeschylus, and they got away with the horn, which became a cornucopia. They ended up shooting Hercules with over a dozen glazed hams and other fresh produce. They were also captured by Percy's evil older brother, Chrysaor, who was born from Medusa's severed neck when the original Perseus beheaded her. Piper and Jason eventually celebrated Jason's 16th birthday in Italy, but the happy celebration was cut short by Percy, who ran up to them telling them what had happened to Annabeth, who was off searching for the Athena Parthenos. Piper was quick to reassure Percy, telling him that Annabeth was one of the toughest, strongest girls she knew, and that she would be okay. They made their way to the Nymphaeum, which was a scene Piper saw in her dagger, consisting of her, Jason, and Percy drowning. But with the help of Jason and Percy, she shot enough fresh, clean water from her cornucopia to clear out the Nymphaeum, and the nymphs thanked them and allowed them to move past. But when they made their way to an underground parking garage, they found Nico D'Angelo being held hostage by the twin giants, Ephialtes and Otis, who were planning on using Nico in a huge circus-like act. The twins released wild animals on the kids, and eventually Bacchus, who got their tribute after their defeat of Chrysaor, arrived to help them fight the giants. But by help, I mean Bacchus teleported them to a coliseum where he sat back and watched Jason and Percy put in all the hard work until he decided to step in and finish the twin giants off. While Nico was alright and thankfully alive, Percy realized Annabeth was still in trouble. They tracked Annabeth to where Arachne was holding her hostage, and it's revealed that Annabeth found the Athena Parthenos, the missing artifact that had been stolen from the Greeks by the Romans centuries ago. Unfortunately, before they could successfully get Annabeth out, Arachne had managed to attach some spider silk to Annabeth's broken leg, and it began dragging dragging her down to the pits of Tartarus, with Percy diving after her, never letting go of her hand. Piper was left devastated over what happened to Annabeth, but they all agreed that they would meet Percy and Annabeth at the doors of death. But in the House of Hades, this was where Piper's faith in her mother was truly tested, and before that, she was tied up and gagged by dwarves in Bologna, who looted their stuff from the ship. She also mentioned in Venice that she had a bad experience with cows, referencing back to when she first became a vegetarian. Eventually, Piper was forced to endure a tragic sight when Hazel manipulated the mist to trick Skyron into thinking he was successfully kicking Jason off the side of a cliff to feed his giant turtle. This showed how powerful Hazel was becoming, and it left Piper realizing that the mist made mortals see what they most expected to see, and she realized the same went for her charm speaking. When she confronted Kion and her two brothers, she realized how powerful love truly was, and how strong and powerful Aphrodite was. She charm spoke Kion's brothers to make them side against their sister, and she also used it to wake up Festus the figurehead, expressing how much love she felt for the dragon, and how much she believed in him, treating him like an emotional being. And when they finally met up with Percy and Annabeth at the doors of death, she tackled Annabeth in a huge hug, relieved that she finally got her best friend back. In the final Heroes of Olympus book, Piper was easily one of the most powerful characters in the series, next to Nico, Hazel, and Percy. At the beginning, she, Annabeth, and Jason hiked up the hills of Ithaca to visit the home of Odysseus, with Jason disguised as an old beggar and Piper and Annabeth as gorgeous serving maidens. They put up a good fight, especially when Michael Varus, a former praetor for Camp Jupiter's 5th cohort, recognized Jason, and Jason met a mania form of his late mother, Beryl, who blamed Zeus for all that had happened to her. Jason was unfortunately stabbed by Imperial Gold, poisoning him. Piper cared for Jason while he was ill and weak, telling him an old Cherokee story of a man who was cursed after he ate squirrel meat, and Jason tried lightly figuring out the moral of the story. Piper came to the conclusion that while Jason might need to make the hard choices, he would make the right choice. She even traveled with Frank Zong when he went to visit his long-lost relatives, all shapeshifters, charm-speaking the ghosts. She eventually made it to Sparta, where she hiked off there with Annabeth, where they had to fight a giant named Mimas with the help of Phobos and Deimos. While Piper was emotionally embracing everything, Annabeth wasn't, panicking and trying to reason everything with knowledge, but Piper pressed her and Annabeth's foreheads together, telling her to embrace it, and Annabeth revealed everything: how terrified she'd been when she fell into Tartarus, how she didn't plan to fall for Percy, and how she wanted to avenge Bob and Damison. Eventually, Piper visited Asclepius, the god of medicine and a son of Apollo, who gave her, Jason, and Leo the physician's cure. Eventually, they flew to Athens, where they ran into Gemini, the original inhabitants of Athens before Athena took it over. Piper charm spoke the snake beings, getting them to confess that they were leading them into a trap, and she sang to them one of her father's old-time favorites, Summertime, appeasing them with her sweet, beautiful voice and showing how much more powerful she was starting to become. She went with Percy and Annabeth to make their way to where the giants were meeting, and she witnessed the deep, passionate love between Annabeth and Percy, feeling every single ounce of love and affection that the two shared. Hazel worked the mist to disguise them as Earthborn, and they snuck in, only for their cover to be blown, which led to Annabeth being captured. Piper was the first to act, rushing in and beginning the attack. The gods eventually joined in, and Piper worked together with her mother. Zeus sent them back to Camp Half-Blood, and Piper, Leo, and Jason worked together to put Gaia to sleep. Piper charm spoke Gaia, sympathizing with all the abuse Mother Earth had suffered through, while Jason kept Gaia in the air and Leo made his sacrifice. place. When Piper learned Leo had the physician's cure all along, she grew angry with him and his choice. By the end of the battle, Raina, Annabeth, and Piper were inseparable, with Piper finally forging a friendship with Raina, and eventually she and Jason shared a deep, passionate kiss on the rooftop of the Zeus cabin, emulating their missed memory first kiss. Unfortunately, Piper and Jason's romance was short-lived. Piper began doing soul-searching when she began the new school year, realizing she barely knew who she was and that her and Jason's relationship was forced upon her through Hira's actions. It led to Piper breaking up with Jason while they searched through the burning maze, looking for what was causing it. But Piper learned that the triumvirates were what caused her father to lose all his money, smeared his acting career, and led to the McLeans losing their Malibu homes, forcing them to move back to Tahlequah. During this time, Piper became very skilled at firing a blowgun and perfected her Grandpa Tom's special recipe of a poison that paralyzed the individual unfortunate enough to get shot with it. Piper agreed to join Apollo, Meg, and Grover on their quest into the burning maze. Using her charm speak to get them a car, and down in the labyrinth, she faced Medea, screaming that she would get Medea for what she tried doing to Jason and Leo over a year ago. She eventually managed to drive them to Jason's school in Pasadena, and they drove to Santa Barbara, only to find Caligula's many cruise ships. She and Apollo worked together, going from ship to ship, with Piper managing to charm Caligula's guards by singing A Life of Illusion by Joe Walsh. And it was there that Piper confided in Apollo as to why she broke things off with Jason in the first place. But there was still a part of her that really truly loved him, as when they got kidnapped by Caligula and Incitatus, and Caligula killed Jason, who dueled him trying to protect his friends. Piper was devastated. In fact, she was so devastated that she screamed and sobbed over Jason's body, praying that he would get brought back to life. She screamed at Apollo, telling him she never wanted to see him ever again. But Piper came back around, stepping in to help stop Medea, stabbing the woman in the back and kissing her on the cheek, telling her that she would tell her to say hello to Jason for her, but that Jason would be headed to the pearly gates of Elysium, and Medea would not be. She'd be headed to Tartarus, where she belonged. And when the battle was over, Piper managed to get Apollo and Meg a private plane, telling them to bring Jason's body back to Camp Jupiter, where he belonged. Her hair at this point was singed and looking an awful lot like Thalia Grace's, and when she saw Leo alive, she hugged him fiercely and sobbed as she told him how Jason died. And Jason's death impacted everyone, including Hazel, who cried over his coffin, demanding to know why he did that to Piper, how it wasn't fair. When Apollo finally got his immortality and godhood back, he visited Piper one last time and found her on the rooftops of a small cabin in Tahlequah, kissing her new girlfriend, Shell, revealing that Piper is bisexual. He asks how she was doing, and Piper said she and her father were adjusting to their new life, and she was said to look happy with Shell. Even Percy Jackson called Piper one tough lady, showing his respect for his and Annabeth's good friend. Piper McLean truly grew from a rebellious, spirited tomboy, ashamed of her parentage, to a confident, beautiful young woman who understood just how powerful love can be. And while she may have faced many challenges along the way, she truly came into her own and finally got to settle down in a place of contentment when she least expected it. Jason's tragic death at the hands of Caligula made her realize how important it is to be forgiving and how to come around when it truly matters, even for those you might have a huge grudge against. So, there you have it, the entire life story of Piper McLean. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to subscribe to the channel and follow my Instagram page to check out any side projects that I'm working on. See ya!